And now, for further edification, our next steps, Steve and Eric will discuss through their panel, collaborating on the distant vision of commercial spaceflight and aviation integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around this afternoon to continue on with our last panel today, integration of commercial space in NASA operations. We are collaborating on the future of spaceflight. I know collaborating has been a buzzword today. We've been talking a lot about it, which is basically what it is, talking, and it's having everyone sit down and spread the differences. So the first panel we talked about, what do we need today? The last panel that we just had is what do we see is going to be the future? I think what we need to start talking about now with this panel is how do we get there? What do we need to do as a group to collaborate and, whether it's legislative, whether it's operational, whether it's tactical, how do we get there? So it's a deep topic, and it's going to take two moderators to do it. My co-moderator, Eric Stallmer, at the end, but also I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel. First, to my left is Mr. Paul Rinaldi. He's the president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association. We have Mr. Andy Cebula, vice president of the Airlines for America. We have Ms. Caryn Schenewerk, senior counsel and senior director of spaceflight policy. We also have Mr. Todd Lindner, director of the Jacksonville Aviation Airport Authority, Cecil Spaceport, and as well, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, Mr. Eric Stallmer. Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Once again, this is a great privilege to be up here, and I think on this third panel, we're really bringing together so many more of the stakeholders, and especially with the other trade associations out there, Airlines for America and the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, combined with what ALPA is doing, what CSF is doing, with NBAA is here, and I think I saw Aerospace Industries Association. And I think what we're starting to see is this tent growing bigger and bigger, that we all know that we need to be a tent or umbrella, whichever we want to call it, but we all need to be under it together as we talk about this collaboration, because it can't just happen between one or two organizations. So I think it's going to be great to have this discussion and dialogue on what others' concerns are. Certainly we see when we stay in our lane what our concerns are on a variety of reasons, and when you collaborate one or two. But I think bringing all these different organizations together on what they see now, but also what in the long term is going to affect and how we have to build and scope for that as we move forward. So I'm thrilled to be on this panel and to be on the stage for the third time. I mean, it's just the bonus incentive here is just it's been remarkable. So that's great.
Definitely. You want to start off?
Well, I'm going to start off with an apology as I look at Caryn and I looked at my last panel. I think this day has been a tremendous success, but we have failed on the diversity scale. I think we've had Caryn and Audrey. Now, that is not a bad thing.
Don't forget Heidi.
And Heidi. Yes. So really, with the three of those ladies are all force multipliers, wearing several different hats. So they really count for 2 or 3 men in the workload that they do. So, but that is something I think we do need to get better. And maybe I'll lead that off with you, Caryn. We just recently we were in a meeting with Wayne Monteith from the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and one of the things that he said. It's a workforce issue. They need to hire people, and I'm sure they're not alone. I'm sure air traffic controllers are looking at the same workforce issue. SpaceX, I think, is pretty fortunate, and a lot of our commercial companies are fortunate that we are getting a lot of young engineers out there. But how do you see the workforce evolving in this whole new environment? In the advancement of innovation and everything, and how do we attract more people, to that big tent that I talked about?
Sure. So in the effort to kind of speak to what the panel's focused on collaborating on the future of spaceflight, and to Eric's point about workforce and the future of our industries, I think that it's important to note that the people that are thinking about going into careers in aviation are great people to think about going into careers in space, and vice versa. I also think it's been a fun opportunity for me in engaging with the aviation community to also engage with some of the organizations that are promoting women in aviation. So as part of the NATCA conference that was happening last week. Was it last week, Andy, that you and I were on a stage together? It all flows together. I did a women's air traffic controllers event, women in aviation event. And it was incredible. There were so many women there. It was a full ballroom. And in space, we're working to get there. We're getting more and more. But it's, I think that one of the things that I think is an interesting opportunity is for anybody who is studying some of the questions that I think we're going to be tackling on this panel that have been discussed today. So how do we integrate these activities? How do we do the modeling? How do we do the thinking and the controlling the air traffic? How do we design operations from the space perspective, from the aviation perspective? All of those are some of the same skill sets. And so I think that the cross-pollination that can happen and the mentoring that can happen across our industries is part of the answer to that question. I think that there are great opportunities for us to look to some of the work that's been done in the aviation sector for fostering diversity in the workplace and apply some of that to the space sector as well. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And one of the things that we were talking with Wayne yesterday was the need for fostering the right skill sets. And so one of the things that I encouraged him to engage with our industry with, and I think the same may be true for aviation, is to help us communicate to those who are asking us about what kind of workers do we need, also understanding what kind of workers do our regulators need. What is that skill set that is something that is needed for actually engaging with us and overseeing our activities and helping facilitate the future of our integration activities. And so how do we feed that back into the Embry-Riddles and the other universities that are developing their syllabus and their coursework around the future of our industry? And I think that some of the things that we're thinking about today are things that we should be feeding back to the university for future leaders.
That's a great point. And when we look at our current workforce in the legacy industry, whether it's air traffic controllers or it's pilots, mechanics, technicians, dispatchers, it's an aging group. They're getting older. In the commercial space industry, I spent a lot of time in Merritt Island, Florida. That we have a home down there, and it's you see all the folks running around with SpaceX gear on and Blue Origin gear on, and it's funny because they're all no older than 25 years old, and it's a brand new industry, and being able to attract that talent to the legacy manned flight game is now a challenge for us because as we've seen, all of our workforces are getting older and they're retiring and moving on to bigger and better things. And so we're now having to attract from a smaller pool of people because we're all trying to attract the same talent that's out there because this is highly specialized professional work. But Paul, on that being, was working towards, getting your workforce up to speed. And I know workforce is a strong issue for you as you work with legislators. Do you find the issue of being able to find diversity in your workforce, is that something to aim for? Is it something that you're really striving for? I know you don't do the hiring, but what do you do to encourage that as an organization?
The FAA changed the hiring practice in 2014. They put in this biodata questionnaire, and they thought that this was the end-all to be-all to really capture what it takes to be an air traffic controller. And let's just say it was a miserable failure. I mean, it was, and I applaud them, and they were actually looking for more diversity. Trish Gilbert, the executive vice president, will say when she got hired in 1990, 1989, there was 16% female air traffic controllers in the system. And we've tried to do so many different things in hiring and focusing on schools, and currently today there's still 16% female air traffic controllers in the system. So we're really not hitting the mark we want to hit when we talk about diversity. There's no shortage of people that want to try to become an air traffic controller. Every time the FAA puts a bid out, there's tens of thousands of people that apply, and then they have to cull a list so they can give the test. And by the time they go through the academy, which is a pass-fail academy, you lose about 50% of the people that are in the process. And then when they get to the facilities, you lose another 15 to 20%. So they maximize the seats in the academy, and we come up with, a 40% number that are actually in the field. It's depending on the facility they go to, it's a 2 to 4 year process to get fully certified. So it's not like you can just go, boom, you're in air traffic control and away you go. So right now we're sitting with about 10,700 certified controllers in the system. We have about 4,000 in some stage of training, so we're really focusing on training in the facility. We just finished our safety conference last month in Las Vegas, where we said every day is a training day, to really focus on the training, because we feel if we focus on the training for the next 18 months or so, we'll be a little healthier with certified controllers in the system. But as we move to the future, we have to keep hiring. We have to keep focusing on diversity. We have to make sure we're getting the best and the brightest in all aspects of aviation.
Definitely. Paul, great comments. Andy, any comments from the airline side on trying to attract that talent and bring them in? And just like Paul said, they can apply, but how do we pick the best that can actually get through the program, whether it's a technician job or it's a dispatcher job or even pilot flight attendant? Are you seeing the same issues?
Yeah, we are. The airlines have put in a lot of investment to partner with colleges, sometimes locally, sometimes a little further away, to develop the workforce and to draw people into wanting to go work at the carrier. So I think you'll continue to see that, and that's relatively new. I don't know that I can remember that happening, but there's almost even a little bit of competition that's going on right now between the carriers about it. But it tends to be focused just on pilots. And so when I think about the issue of commercial space, think about the airlines in a little bigger perspective, I do think that it's important that we also are emphasizing that these are technologies that are emerging, growing, and that they have a level of excitement, because a lot of times I would think, certainly I have kids that are in college age, aviation in particular, I mean, we've been around for a while. For us, it's new and it's exciting because we're in it. But for younger people, we have to make sure that they understand the technologies that they would be exposed to, that they would be utilizing, whether they're working on aircraft, whether they're flying aircraft, or in the sense of managing them. In the same way as we look at how to integrate, commercial space or any other non-traditional user, it's going to take some real thoughtful and I would say creative ways to handle this that are exactly what I feel like, at least in the people that are coming into the workforce at this stage, that is the kind of thing that we need to draw them and draw on that expertise.
Mike, not to throw another one on your direction, but off the workforce, maybe somewhat workforce related. When I co-chaired the ARC, my co-chair was Mike Cirillo. And Mike really did a great job of he had been exposed to other ARCs before and kind of helped guide me through the process and everything. We had a really good discussion. But I think it was the first time we were both communicating, A4A and CSF, the airlines and the space industry. And it's from our perspective, we saw it as, hey, we're really interdependent on each other, from the GPS navigation and communication and weather and all the things that space provide. How does the airline see that relationship, and how can we grow that relationship through collaboration?
So, this is at least just an observation that I'll make, which is that at some point, space got to a level of activity that it's like, yeah, your presence was made known. Your presence was made known by delays that we would have to take, or flights that we might have to divert or delay. And then the impacts, like on what it does to the schedule connections, what it does to compliance with flight time, duty time, and another hub operation. So I think that at this point in time, I would definitely say that there is an absolute awareness within the airline community about commercial space. My title, while it doesn't always settle well with commercial space side, it's next gen and new entrants, which again, dealing with the commercial space industry as kind of a new entrant, although you've been around for a long time in launches. And so there is definitely an awareness of it. The recommendations that our organization has fostered have been around the themes of collaboration, around the themes of being able to provide the air traffic controllers with the kind of technology and capabilities that they would need to be able to, at some point in the future, I would say minimize the negative impact that commercial space would have on let's say, on the airlines, and instead really integrate it.
Well, we're talking about demographics, and one of the demographics that we haven't had on a panel yet so far is a spaceport representative. And with that, I'd like to look towards Todd. We've been talking about pilots, we've been talking about operators of the vehicles. Let's talk about the folks that are running the base operation, and what demands or needs do you see to accelerate into this new era of commercial space?
Yeah, thank you. In Jacksonville, Cecil Spaceport, it's rather peculiar. It's not a Part 139 airport, it's a 91 airport. It is owned by the Jacksonville Aviation Authority, who also owns and operates Jacksonville International Airport. So it is important for us as an organization to maintain that relationship with the airlines, because without the airlines, we're not going to be successful. At the same time, we're moving forward with commercial space operations. So that level of coordination is important. It's been discussed on all three panels today, which I must applaud. One of the things I learned, and again, you learn never to assume in this industry. I believe it was Mr. Hopkins was up here. He was with Delta. In a conversation in a meeting with ALPA, I learned that they were not made aware of proposed operations. And so coordination, as soon as we find out we're going to conduct an operation, we start communicating that information with all of our air carriers, all the air carriers that are serving Jacksonville, and get the word out in that manner at least 120 days ahead of time to allow that coordination to take place. One of the things that you learn as a spaceport operator is that whereas as an airport, you have airports and you have aviation operators, whether it's air carriers, whether it's corporate activity, whatever it may be. In the commercial space world, you learn pretty quick that commercial space operators, they're not wired to work on airports, to work through the aviation system that aviation people are accustomed to. So what we have done is kind of taken it upon ourselves to assist them with the coordination between the operator and FAA, and that allows the operator themselves to be much more focused on the mission at hand. Also, one of the things that going forward, one of the things we look into the future, I'm wondering if the regulations that we follow right now for horizontal launch operations and the regulations we follow for vertical operations are virtually the same. However, there's a lot of differences. So I can see us in the future going forward possibly coming up with the new policy, new procedures that may be different for horizontal launch providers as it is for the vertical providers. Some areas will help one, some areas will help the other, but I don't see them staying the same as we go forward. Also, as it relates to airspace, I had a question about this myself whenever we received our launch operator's license. One of the things we weren't required to address was airspace, as it relates to the terminal airspace. And so my question after we got the license, of course, I asked the FAA, I said, what about things like Part 77 airspace requirements, things of that nature? I said, we didn't have to address that. Well, he said, okay, so you see on your license there, it says, we're operating in accordance with Federal Aviation Regulation Part 420 and all other applicable regulations. Like, oh, they'll catch all. Okay. So I think there need to take a look at addressing those more prevalent issues that can be associated with airspace in Part 77. And that's something that vertical launch operators, they don't need to be concerned with Part 77. Horizontal operators do. We're very fortunate in Jacksonville. Cecil was a former naval air station, so we had all the assets and infrastructure in place to conduct horizontal launch operations. We didn't have to build anything new. We are building stuff new now because we know, the Jeff Bezos of the world and the Bransons and Elon Musk. We know they don't want to operate out of a 1941 hangar. So we're building new facilities at this point in time, but we were very fortunate. We had all infrastructure in place to accommodate these operations, including ARF facilities, our aircraft rescue and firefighting facilities that we continue to provide today. So I think going forward, I think you're going to see a lot of changes as it relates to horizontal launch operations, as it relates to regulation and policy as compared to vertical operations. At the same time, at the end of the day, once that vehicle is out in the airspace and it's launched, they're the same. They're both rockets flying through the air. So, in that area, it's going to be very common, and a lot of the regulations are going to come back together and very much mimic each other. But, going forward, we'll see what happens, but I expect there to be some serious changes.
Hey, Todd, given your bipolar life of being a spaceport and an airport and having to talk to two different parts of FAA, what are the pros and or the positives, if you will, on working with FAA from an aviation perspective, and then also the positives of working with Wayne's group at Office of Commercial Space, wearing your spaceport hat, and how does it differ? Because you are uniquely situated.
I got to be honest. I started flying airplanes when I started taking lessons when I was 15. Got my license, I think, when I was 17. So I've been dealing with the FAA for quite a while. I got to tell you, I thought they were one big happy family.
They're not.
until I got into the commercial space end of it. And and it's not like the gnashing of teeth that that you think, but they're like most organizations. The right hand doesn't talk to the left hand, back and forth, and so you don't know what's happening. So a lot of times, what you find is that you're the device that is being applied to get everybody on the same page at the same time. And maybe they think they are, but whenever you ask a certain question or you say something specifically, it at least makes one group or the other say, hey, I need to call the folks over at airports, or I need to call the folks at commercial space, or I need to call air traffic to make sure we're all on the same sheet of music. That it is very much, at 1 minute you're talking to somebody in airports and you're wearing that airport hat and explaining that when you're referring to explosive sighting criteria established by commercial space, that it has a horizontal element, it doesn't have a vertical element, so to speak, and then they finally get it, or if they question you, they'll call somebody from commercial space and they'll figure it out. I think that's been the biggest hurdle to conducting these types of operations, is getting everybody on the same page at the same time, because we don't know what we don't know, and until somebody brings that to your attention, you don't.
Well, that you brought up a great topic of just the launch vehicle or reentry vehicle, and we start to talk about certification of the vehicle that enters or leaves the current NAS or into or out of orbit. This is a very hot button topic, as we know here in the Beltway here. and it's a very serious topic for aviation about, how do we certify the vehicles going forward? Caryn, if you could just walk us through, when you come up with a design plan or something that you're looking to put into space, and there's so much innovation there, where do you take it and where do you go with it to get it approved to be a vehicle that goes up?
Yeah. So I think this goes to the difference that we all, I think, have been educating ourselves on with regard to the different parts of the FAA, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation and its mandate under Title 51, and the rest of the FAA in Title 49. And it's an important point that the AST regulates, the FAA DOT regulates commercial space for public safety, right? And the public safety includes everybody in this room who is not involved in the launch activity, right? So that is the members of the flying public, people who are on vessels at sea, people that are on their at home, anybody who is my neighbor who is not involved in my space activity. So you could be a space company and be considered a member of the public. So that's a very important piece of it, is that that's what they're really thinking about. You're allowed as a commercial space company to to accept the risk of undertaking our activity, right? So the FAA is not certifying to my customer that my vehicle will deliver their payload to the exact orbit that they want it delivered to. The customer is also part of that, is a savvy customer, right? So they are part of understanding and accepting the risk of engaging in that activity. It's a very important aspect to understand. And so what the FAA is looking to us for and regulating us is specifically to that public safety question. Are we operating in a manner that protects the public? Have we taken the steps that we need to do, whether that's evacuating an area, flying a trajectory as we usually do over the ocean, over non-populated areas? Are we coordinating with the Coast Guard to issue notice to mariners to make sure there aren't vessels in that area? And somebody mentioned earlier today that we've had airspace violations, we've had NOTMAR violations where we've had to stand down because somebody that's considered the public violated that space and we could not fly. So that's a very important distinction with aviation activities where you fly over people all the time. You fly with people who are buying a ticket very quickly. I could do it right now on my phone while we were sitting here. And so it's a different expectation and it's a different risk profile. So I think that that's an important piece of making sure that when we think about what are we doing, we're not certified because we haven't achieved that level of maturity in operation, nor do we have that level of expectation with regard to where we conduct our operations. So you won't hear me expressing frustration that I can't fly from the middle of the country. I understand that that is an operating constraint. So when I went helping the company look for where our next launch location might be, there's a reason why that next launch location was in South Texas, in a fairly unpopulated area that allows us to fly a trajectory out over the ocean. It wasn't, in a cool part of Central Texas where we already had operations in McGregor, right, where we test engines on a daily basis. So that distinction is key to that question. And I think that as we continue to work on collaborating towards the future, I think that it's actually a distinction that can have less and less of a difference between our industries as we develop the capabilities and exercise the opportunities that come with refining our individual operations in a way that can be less disruptive to each other. So for example, the tools that they use, we really rely on the government to use these. So the tools that the government uses to determine our hazard areas. So as has been discussed, the big volumes of airspace that are closed during our operations and the time frames around them that are closed, those are government developed modeling capabilities that are decades old, right? So we're very excited about the conversation about what could new modeling capabilities look like. So, a lot of conversations happened in the arts and in various forums about the HRAM, the Hazard Risk Assessment and Management tool. That tool, if it works the way that we all think it could, will help us shrink those volumes. If we start using some of the things that Dwayne's been thinking about with the time management and doing dynamic management of airspace, of the air traffic. When we start thinking about those pieces and putting those together, which are seemingly pretty low-hanging fruit, then the question of the fact that we're regulated for public safety and aviation is certified for passengers starts coming into, it becomes less of a problem and less of an issue, because if you can fly around us more easily rather than having to avoid us as much, then we can protect the public. As Wayne Monteith pointed out earlier, the most important thing is what's the safety factor that we're following. So we can safely secure that area and prevent any kind of incident between aviation and space, or aviation and vessels, or space and aviation and space, and anybody else that's part of the public that we're protecting. But we can do so in a much more efficient manner. So I really think that the question of space certification is one that is a question of our maturity, but it's not one that we have to answer to solve the issues that we're trying to solve together right now.
Understood. And I think there's a question just popped into my head when you were speaking about the certification of the vehicle. And are you collaborating, and I know this is proprietary and this could be a tough question, are you collaborating with the other launch operators that are out there now? I know that there's some in existence and some that are coming up. Are you collaborating with them on the safety side of this, on design features?
So we collaborate with other members of our industry in a whole host of ways. One of them is the efforts that are happening with standard development right now. And so many of those are safety standards. So, and then there's also sharing of information with regard to mishaps and anomalies that flows through, in some cases, the FAA. And those lessons learned, so the more that I kind of joke, like at SpaceX, I regularly feel like we are tip of the spear, right? We're the first to cross the line on many experiences, and a lot of them are positive, but some of them are learning opportunities. Mm-hmm. So I think that what it looks like to run an anomaly investigation, for example, of a commercial spaceflight incident. That is something that, as we work with the FAA gains insight and gains more experience with, and then that's able to translate out to the industry as they help other members of industry develop their mishap plans and then follow them. It's also in a positive way. So as I work with Dwayne, for example, on understanding how we can best share information on the timing of our operations or on the hazard areas, and how we might flow information under the existing situation better, how we can optimize given the tools we have today, that can then be spread out to other industries. And we're certainly talking about that. And the ARCs that we've had, the work that we do through the Commercial Spaceflight Federation in particular, as our industry association, I think is goes to your point of information sharing.
Andy.
Yeah, if I could, the industry, there was a rulemaking maybe everyone knows this, but there was a rulemaking that came out this summer. There was a very comprehensive rewrite of all of the regulations that govern, the FAA regulations that govern commercial space, and the conventional or traditional, whatever you want to call us, aviation community, the airports, the controllers, the pilots, the carriers, and general aviation, made some comments and hit on some common themes that we all were endorsing. And one of those was the experience that the aviation industry has had in sharing information through things like CAST and ASIAS, which are they're fostered by the FAA, they're fostered by the industry, but it has been an incredible way to learn from the experiences and then also prospectively anticipate problems based on some trends that you're seeing that can then help us with corrections. So in the commercial space industry, I think the application of that at the moment would be very different. But as far as having some kind of a structure, it's something that we were recommending because we think that it could make them safer, which of course then in a selfish way, it would then, the whole evaluation of the risk impact area and all that could be affected.
Hey, Caryn, just to elaborate a little bit on what you were saying about, collaboration and working together and everything. I think SpaceX has evolved quite a bit from the time of going it alone, doing it yourself, to now, different partnerships. And I know you guys on one area, from a tools perspective, has partnered or been utilizing different tools on the launch area and everything. I think one of them is like launch on demand. Can you tell a little bit about that, on how you're working to kind of integrate some of these different tools and what finding the best fit for you guys and for others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the things that has been true about the company is that we're always evaluating the build-buy trade. And the company is known because, for the fact that we, like some of the other new entrants, the members of our commercial space industry have changed the way that we do business compared to what was the way that the space industry did business in the past, which was you often saw integrators. So an engine was built by one company, a tank was built by another, and then maybe an avionics box, and then the company integrated them. We build almost everything in-house. We procure a lot of different aspects of our vehicle in terms of the raw materials, but it's largely built in-house. And so last night I was actually having a conversation, and I was saying that one of the ways that SpaceX is kind of compared to the aviation industry is that it's kind of like the FedEx or the UPS of space, in that somebody gives us something and says, we want you to deliver it to a certain place at a certain time. But the difference would be if FedEx or UPS was building its planes and trucks and vessels and anything that it was using pretty much to then do that delivery to that place at that time. And so when we see opportunities, though, to partner with other entities, we're always interested in that. We're always interested in the idea that something is commercially available because we think competition is good. People have been hearing that from me for almost a decade now. Competition is very good, and it feeds into innovation. And so launch on demand, Burton, are you here still? Oh, hello. Is looking to provide a service, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, wave your hand or give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, is looking to provide a service that is the service that is currently only really provided by the range. And so we look to the Air Force as our contractor for range services. That includes surveillance, it includes hazard modeling, a whole host of activities that companies like his are actually thankfully looking to get into and bring some optionality to the marketplace. And so I think that it actually feeds into another point that I want to make sure that as we talk about the future of spaceflight and the integration activities that we talk about here, which is, I think we will be in a better state in resolving a whole host of questions related to commercial space if there are opportunities in the marketplace to find those solutions. And also if we are not competing, for example, on issues that we shouldn't, in areas that we shouldn't be competing. So one of those is the regulations. Members of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation worked very well together to talk about how we would streamline the regulations, because we don't think that we should be competing on who can best navigate regulations, right? We should be competing on our capabilities. Another one of those is that we shouldn't be competing on who can actually convince whom to give us access to and decode the hazard analysis approach that is applied against us in a government model. Those should be available to us, and we should have open and transparent access to those. So the launch on demand is an example of something where if we are trying to push for the best opportunities and the best ability to understand what our hazard volumes are and to monitor them, then if we have competition, if we have a marketplace that is more than one, and the one being only the US government, then we have an opportunity to grow and expand and probably solve some of the questions that we, the aviation and commercial space industry, are interested in solving together. And I think that I'm by no means an expert on the aviation world, but one of the things that has been important is the development of various providers and competing technologies, and those foster a more fruitful marketplace.
Great. Paul, I wanted to ask you a question about, when you go up and the president of NATCA goes up onto the Hill or meets with heads of the FAA or the COO of the ATO, and you get together and you sit down and talk with them and you say, this is the equipment that our people need to do their job properly and safely. What's the reception? Is there, obviously, everyone says, well, look towards Congress, but what do you think is the way to go after that and get that funding for this equipment?
Well, the funding system is 100% broken, as we're on a CR right now until November 22nd, and we're hearing rumors now if they move forward with impeachment, possibly another government shutdown. I mean, this is what we've been dealing with for about 20 years right now, and it's really hard to do long-term planning and sustain a very safe, efficient aviation system. Everything we have goes into running the day-to-day. And when they go, well, we're looking towards the future, and Datacom is a perfect example of, we were in the process doing robust testing with Datacom, and then we had a 35-day government shutdown. We sought to go back and do it. We identified that some of the aircraft in the system, the avionics don't interface properly. So we're working through all these bugs, and it's taken, because the system itself, the backbone of the system is so antiquated, it takes forever to adapt to modern day technology. While modern day technology is evolving so rapidly and so quickly, we have a structure that we can't move. Chairman Schuster tried to do something different and pull the ATO out and give it stable, predictable funding so we could address technology, modernization, new entrants in a more streamlined fashion than the archaic government process. But that didn't get through Congress. So when you talk to congressmen and women and you go, well, why can't you do this? And really we are focused solely on running today's operation as it's expanding. Yes, we're trying to modernize, but we're doing it very slowly. As we all know, it's a risk-averse system. You don't want to put too much change into a system. I talked a little bit about our staffing and the training of controllers, and now if you bring in a new piece of equipment online and that the personnel you need to train that, and what are you taking away from, and all of that, it doesn't blend together with the current funding system, and it's a struggle. One of the comments I heard from Todd is that you would think it's one big happy FAA. No, it's not. It's anything but that. It's titanium stovepipes that I think you said, Todd, that you find yourself as go-between between lines of business in the FAA. Me, my counterparts, our safety technology people that are out there, that's all they do. They continuously find themselves trying to bring together lines of business of the FAA because it's so parochial. And it's frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. So we were close with the Schuster bill. I know, there's probably some people in here that said that was a bad bill, but we haven't heard any other ideas since that bill wasn't successful. We haven't heard how we're going to fund the system. Like I said, continuous CRs, always focused on current day operation. Obviously, we need new modern technology. 8-gram is a perfect example of what we need. I think we did the human in the loop testing maybe 4 years ago, and it just sits. It just sits because of money. That's real technology we can get on the glass that would help streamline airspace, certainly. Datacom's another one that would help us do automated reroutes around an area, and then when the area came back online, we'd be able to get them back on course. Obviously, the airlines have a vested interest in this because they don't want the delays, they don't want see canceled flights, missed connections. So there has to be a different way to fund modern technology, fund the future of these new entrants. UAV is another one. You just start scratching your head when they talk about how many are going to be flying, how many vessels the controllers are actually going to be looking at and responsible. And I go, how many controllers are we going to need? I mean, it's mind-boggling. And then you look at our infrastructure, our buildings, our en route centers. They're all 55 years old plus. They spend way too much money keeping the upkeep of these buildings running. And it really is, it's mind-boggling. And there's no way to actually, we have 21 en route centers. And we are actually on record saying we could do it with less if you can combine some of these centers up in places that make sense. And certainly new modern facility, modern technology, but there's just no money to do that. And it's really frustrating at this time.
There's an opportunity here. And I think Jim Ullman mentioned it on the last panel, something like a private-public funding sort of setup, such as the Lance program for the UAS community, where the government is funded, the project is funded through a private sector for-profit organization trying to get in there. Do you see any wiggle room there? Do you think that we could maybe work on that as a group, as all stakeholders here on the panel and those in the room here, to work on something where we can develop a way to fund getting this equipment into the system? Or am I just being naive? Maybe it's the latter.
Listen, I think we would try anything. We would talk to anyone. I'm sure if commercial space had more access to the airspace and more dynamic ability to launch on times that they could actually get into the atmosphere, I think they'd be willing to pay into a system that they were actually have more predictability. But then it really comes to that issue of user fees, right? With UAVs, is it going to be a user fee? And if it's going to be a user fee with them, then is GA actually going to get a mandate on user fee? And you know their position on the user fee, that the airlines own the airspace. You can't give us a user fee. So it really, what worked 30 years ago is not working right now. It's not. And technology is evolving rapidly, and other countries are doing a much better job than us of modernizing their air traffic control system and the predictability of flights, because they're able to adapt and be out. They pulled their air navigation service provider. They pulled that away from the regulatory and the safety function of the government, and they were able to do things more rapidly, Canada being one of them. And the equipment the controllers are working with in Canada really makes me drool every time I see their positions and their facilities as compared to what we work with.
Hey, Todd, I have a question for you regarding we talked about the 3 different arcs that took place last year. One of them was a spaceport categorization arc. I think you were involved with it a little bit.
Yes.
Can you tell us, I know it wasn't like a unanimous outcome on the arc, but can you tell us some of the pros and cons that came from that arc, and what we need to do to move forward on the categorization for spaceports?
Well, I think some of the pros, some of the big pros was the fact that I believe it opened up a lot of different people's eyes as to what the characteristics were of different spaceports and launch providers, and what the specific requirements were. I know for myself and a couple others in particular, we commented openly about how much we had learned through that process, because you go through life thinking that what you know about something is, again, you don't know what you don't know until you get into that situation. So one of the big pros taken away from that was it provided everybody the opportunity to learn so much more about the other capabilities that we have within the industry. Probably one of the cons was the fact that I think there were some misinterpretations by certain members of the airport community in particular, and just misunderstandings as far as operations and the way they worked, which was very, very unfortunate. And it seemed like regardless of what you would do to try to clarify something, it was never enough. However, I think another big pro from that was the fact that FAA Airports was able to learn a lot from that process and learn about the launch providers, especially the vertical folks, because that was something airport folks had virtually no idea what was required for those type of operations. Going forward, I think it's important to put together a group that is diverse in that they represent all communities of the industries. When I say that, I mean, I'm talking about people from ALPA, people from A4A, people from airports, spaceports, the whole 9 yards, launch operators, because I think that's the only way at the end of the day we're going to really get our differences worked out. And I'm not saying that there's going to be somebody who's right and somebody who's going to be wrong, but there has to be a very strong level of communication, and you have to be very, very open about that. And sometimes you have to walk away. Just to put it in a real close context, if I may relate this story, I had an argument with my wife the other night, and it became very, very clear that I was right. She was wrong. At the end of it, you know what she said? She goes, "Do you want to be right, or do you want to be in a relationship?" I shut up. So that's kind of the way this is. Sometimes it's better to step down and walk away. And a lot of times when different groups, and I'm guilty of this myself, maybe I don't get it originally. Maybe, I just don't understand. And I'm taking a stand that's, as I learn later on, it's wrong. So I think different people will use different, simulation or different examples to open their eyes.
So if, in looking at the Spaceport Aviation Rulemaking Committee, from the A4A perspective, some of the issues that we had, there was a concern in why we supported a non-concur to the primary recommendations, although I think we ended up with like 2 distinct sides of it. So it wasn't fully cooked, if you will, if you were really trying to reach consensus, was we were concerned that the spaceport wasn't connected to a specific type of operation, where in the airport certification world, the airport's getting certification because they want to have service by a scheduled carrier, typically. And there are parameters around what those operations are. In the spaceport recommendation, there wasn't really a connection. This was going on at the same time that Front Range was launching a spaceport in Denver, very close to Denver International Airport. And there was a lot of tension, as you could imagine, around that, as well as one of the other issues that we're facing in the aviation industry is the impact of flying over people and the environmental pressures that we're hearing as we're trying to modernize, going to more efficient routings, in essence affecting fewer people with performance-based navigation procedures. We're getting hammered by communities in different places around the country. So there wasn't a clear connection on how these spaceports would deal with the environmental impact they might have. I'll go again to Front Range in the Denver metropolitan area. And so there were some things we felt like that really needed to be connected. If I'm looking at it and trying to reach collaboration, I think we just didn't have, we probably could have worked longer and maybe been able to come to some sort of a consensus around it, but we did have a time frame. And so ultimately that was where, at least where we were as an organization in breaking from the space community and that on that arc.
Can I pull on that?
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
about
sure,
that?
sure.
I have a question regarding that. I'd like you to go a little bit deeper on the environmental part of that, because in order for a launch provider to get a license or permit, in order for a spaceport to get a license, we have to complete an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, depending on what your environmental consequences are, before you can even get a license or a permit. So I never understood what the question was regarding environmental.
So in the case, and again, I'll go to Denver as an example. There is, and if I remember correctly, the conversation, because there wasn't a link to a specific type of operation, would be a horizontal operation. Horizontal operation to a person on the ground, it's making noise. They're not saying, oh, well, that's commercial space noise, so we can put that in that category. So when I'm hearing it, then I have to evaluate it by this kind of impact, as opposed to a conventional airline operation, which I'm putting in this. And the recommendation was not taking that in a connected manner. And that was what we saw as one of the big disconnects on what we're facing as a community.
Okay.
I guess we got a question from the audience or text.
We could open it up for questions if anyone wants to approach the microphones, but we also have a text question we could take as well. Go ahead with the text question.
So the question from the audience is, although no DoD representatives were on the panels, how do the panelists see the DoD evolving as the commercial space side continues to develop?
I'll try and answer this question. So I think that I'm just going to speak to my expectations here, and that is that I think what we're all trying to grapple with, and by we all, it's the people who have taken the time to share their day with us here and their time in the course of the ARCs and all the efforts that have gone into this conversation. And that is a very commercial focused activity, right? These questions are coming up because we're seeing, thankfully, an increased activities in the commercial space sector. And by commercial, I mean very specifically the non-DoD, non-civil space. So not NASA, not defense, but commercial activities. And that is a really good news story for the United States, right? The fact that we have recaptured commercial launches from our international competitors, and we're bringing those into the United States, which means that we're creating jobs and we're creating opportunities here. That's why we're working towards the $1 to $3 trillion economy, but a $1 trillion economy just in the United States is the goal. So in that increased activity, we're seeing the increased need to have conversations because we're commercial operators, right? So it's one thing when the airlines are concerned about something related to our national security, and we will defer, of course, to our national security interests. And when we're talking about NASA astronaut carriage or science that affects not just the United States but the entire world that NASA is launching for the U.S. government. So I think that the reason that we're having this conversation, the reason that you don't see DoD here is because we're focused on this increased, again, positive, great news story of commercial space launch and not the questions of DoD and civil space, because we all hope that those continue to prosper, and we in the commercial space industry look to facilitate those, of course. But really what we need to be thinking about is how do we, if we're all engaging in this commercial enterprise where we are looking to fly passengers safely and control air traffic that is the commercial air traffic and fly payloads from commercial spaceports, that we need to resolve some of these issues among commercial companies. And that I think that what we would expect is that the DoD and NASA will continue to operate in the way that it has largely operated, which is with the interests of our national security and our civil space activities at the forefront of their concerns. And we all have the work to do on the commercial side.
Caryn, while we're still on a roll here, I wanted to pull on a thread a little bit that Todd mentioned about marital communication and sometimes the breakdown.
Go
but
Nats.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. We all have that in common. But our industry, the commercial space industry, has already started to coordinate schedules with the airlines by talking to the FAA about potential launch windows and getting feedback on preferred options. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that's evolving? Sure. You guys have a steady launch cadence.
The HARP came up earlier. I think Audrey brought it up. And HARP is actually a testament to when the commercial industry has gone to our national security apparatus and said, hey, you have a solution to a problem that we're facing, and that is high traffic areas, right? So the holiday release program was born of releasing special use airspace to the aviation community for use in these very high traffic scenarios. So I want to make sure my friends at the Department of Defense and at NASA don't think that I'm saying that they aren't collaborating. I think they are, and thank goodness that the range provides the amazing services that it provides to us as we look to commercial providers to come on. So that said, what was the question?
About coordinating the launch windows with the FAA.
So I want to take
airlines.
one more opportunity to say thank you to Dwayne Freer, because he has just really, from the command center, as he's come into his role and really taken a very proactive, forward-thinking approach to engaging with our industry. And he has fostered some really important conversations for me with various sectors across the U.S. and within the FAA to try and drive this conversation in the right direction. And that is, one, just basic education activities, and then two, how do we collaborate? How do we pluck the low-hanging ripe fruit from the tree and apply it against our needs? And that has been things as simple, and again, I appreciate that Audrey already brought this up. It's as simple as things that are still on paper and on the phone, but even just using the phone is an improvement right now. So we can't emphasize enough, I think, how easy it is here to make some significant improvements on all of our lives. I mean, we can talk about tech tools, we can talk about things that are going to take years to develop and that appropriations could come in the way of, but we can also talk about how we can just pick up the phone, we can set up conversations, we can try and create some standardized approaches to how we collaborate in a good way. How do we share information? How do we use the R15 that we're required to file 15 days in advance of a launch and make sure that everybody understands the information that is in it and that it's pushed out to the right people and that they're getting the updates from it and that they can find the operational data that they need in that notice, right? How do we expand that if we need to? How can we shrink it? How can we take the things that we're doing today and expand and improve those? And I think that is the way we're going to get to a future state of commercial spaceflight and integration with aviation is to pluck every one of those opportunities and apply them against this problem immediately. And I really commend the other operators, Virgin, I see Sarisha's here, and Audrey again, because we're all trying to pick off pieces of this and find and optimize. And then we are also collaborating within our industry to say, what did you do that worked? How did you do this? Okay, that's a great idea. Did you try this against that problem? Oh, maybe not. And we all are working through that. And so what I think is a near-term future state that we need to be is a really good feedback loop. And it's a feedback loop with the aviation community and the space community, and then even within each of ours. So if I do something that works really well with Jacksonville sector, I want to make sure that information and how we did the right thing there is flowing down to Houston, where I'm now operating from Boca Chica and having to work with that group. And that if we figure out something there that we had to figure out there because we didn't have the government involved, right? So down in when I'm operating out of Boca Chica, like there's no range there. It's a whole new thing for us and for the FAA in some ways. To think about doing orbital launch from that site. And so how can we build on those and then share that back up the chain? So I think that answers your question. It's just little things that go a long way that help us build trust. So educate, trust, and communicate. I think it's really important.
Well said.
Yeah.
That sums it up right there. I think we've run out of time, folks. I want to thank my co-moderator, Eric, for bringing some great questions and organizing this great panel. And I also want to thank our panelists, most importantly, Paul, Andy, and Caryn, thanks, and Todd as well. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Let's give them a big round of applause for being here. Thank you.